This is Making Stitches. This week, Cathy Emmott, the textile artist behind Dear Emma Designs, talks to me about her inspiring surroundings in the Yorkshire Dales, tips for other creatives thinking about taking their hobbies to the next level, and her wonderful garden workshop where all the magic happens.
I really love it, and I know I'm so lucky to have it. The photos you'll have seen of it, that isn't day to day. It's generally really untidy. Lots and lots of piles of fabric strewn everywhere, but I'm certainly not not a neat worker at all. And I think a lot of people who deal in fabric, especially, they'll have their own stashes of fabric, live in a permanent state of disarray, really. But I think that's how we carry on being creative. You can't be creative in a tidy environment.
Hello and welcome to Making Stitches, a podcast celebrating crafts and the stories of the makers behind them. My name's Lindsay, and this week we're hearing from a textile artist who specialises in applique and machine embroidery, who creates the most beautiful pictures of birds, flowers and quirky street scenes. Cathy Emmott, the artist behind Dear Emma Designs, works in her garden workshop in the Yorkshire Dales, producing pictures, bags and other items decorated with intricate stitching and applique. I came across Cathy's work after a blogger I read regularly spoke gushingly about her. I was blown away by her cute street scenes in particular. I was thrilled when she agreed to speak to me for Making Stitches, and she began by explaining exactly what it is she does.
Basically, it's almost like making a collage but in fabric. So I spend a lot of time hunting for tiny scraps of fabric, applying a fabric glue which comes in the form of sheets, so it's like a bonder web glue, onto the back of those tiny snippets, and then creating a picture. Once I've got the picture in place, then I use free motion machine embroidery to stitch in the detail, really. So combination of different coloured threads, depending on what it is I'm actually, what the actual picture is. If it's a more natural scene, I'll use sort of more softer colours. But if it's a street scene, for example, I'll tend to use mainly black. But in a nutshell, that is really it, is creating a collage with tiny scraps of fabric. There's no other way to describe it, really.
Well, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it, but actually to see it, it's truly artistic. It's beautiful, the pictures that you create. And
Thank you.
I mean, you've got two sides to your work from what I've seen. You've got, like you mentioned, your street scenes, which are kind of very graphic and almost, without wishing to, how do I phrase this correctly, but almost like a cartoon, really,
Yeah.
of a street. But then you've got your beautiful artistic pictures of birds and flowers and the natural world. Where do you get your artistic inspiration from?
So really, the inspiration comes from two different areas. So obviously the natural world is a big part of what I do. I would say it's probably 60-70% of what I focus on. And that's really from kind of encouraged by living where I live. I live just on the border of the Yorkshire Dales, and the fields at the bottom of the garden are pasture. It's all pasture land, so we've got a lot of cattle, but as a result of them feeding off there, there's a lot of wildflowers that sort of pop up as well. I also live on a railway embankment, and often trespass along there. And at certain times of the year, so really sort of from springtime through to the end of summer, the wildflowers you get there are amazing because they're so untouched, and it's just nature taking over, really. So I have loads of inspiration just from my back garden onwards. Garden birds are really what I love. I'm not particularly into any other sort of birds, so seabirds, that sort of thing. I'm not really interested in those so much because I don't live in an area where there are them. So the natural world, yes, is a big one. It gets me to focus really more on being quite accurate. So I want the image to be quite a likeness of what it is I'm trying to portray. So shape and colour are really important to me from that aspect. And finding just the right shade of, of a brown fabric for a wren's wing is quite an obsession really. So I want it to be fairly, a fairly good likeness. But the other side of it is the street scenes, which is totally opposite. So I think the reason I loved to do the street scenes is because I can be a lot more freer with the process and a bit more spontaneous with the designs, and I can use the fabrics, the colours in the fabric a little bit more, can be led by those really more than getting hung up on a particular shape of a wing or a beak. It's sort of more fabric pattern led work really, and I tend to work at one end of the street and literally work to the opposite side. It's quite an organic sort of method really, but more freeing, I think. So I have tried to drop one or the other and really focus on, for example, the natural world over the street scenes, but I sort of use the street scenes as a way to counteract the sort of, the way that I have to be more focused, I suppose. It's just a bit more of a freeing situation, and both of them are equally as important from the customer's point of view, because they get to see both sides of the work. I think that's really it. But the street scenes, I don't live in one of those houses. I don't live in a terrace house. I live at the top of a very long street leading up to a station, but there are a lot of terrace houses. Tend to like a lot of the little quirky details you'll get from terrace houses. So, washing lines, bins out the front, milk bottles on the doorstep, odd sort of everydayness really of it. And I like to combine or add those points of interest into my work, because people do notice them actually. Eventually they will notice a tiny little milk bottle on the doorstep, or a railing that's half sort of bent. They'll notice these things, which gives me a lot of pleasure actually. So
yeah, there's so much detail in those pictures, isn't there? It's something that I've noticed as well, and I can imagine to own a piece that's got your street scenes on. No matter how many times you look at it, for a long time, you're going to keep noticing more and more each time you look, because of all the different layers of detail and intricacy within it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, for me, is the use of the fabrics that I try and gather up, because when I'm having something printed, so for example, a street scene is being printed, I have to think about how much detail a print of that is going to show. So, for example, I tend to use quite a lot of lace, bark cloth, which is quite a loose woven vintage fabric, just because it gives me that texture that I want to show up in the printed version. So I'm kind of always thinking about the whole process really, unless of course it's a commission piece, so it's a one-off piece, then I don't have to think too hard about how it's going to translate into print. But yeah, it's just nice to combine new fabrics with older fabrics as well. And I do sometimes dye fabrics as well. If I can't get the right shade of cream or brown, I'll tend to dye bits of lace, so it gives it that worn look as well. So yeah.
Now, you mentioned the street scenes were quite organic as you built them up from one side to the other. Do you know what it's going to look like when you start, or is it something that develops as you're going through the process?
At the moment, I'm sort of stuck in one format. So, and I've done that sort of format for a couple of years, really. So I tend to include some type of hilly background, which again, I suppose is inspired from where I am. There's a lot of large sort of mountains where I live. So I like something going on in the distance. And then I tend to like to incorporate some sort of parkland. So something with a bench or a hint of a duck pond or something like that, all in the background with the trees and the various sort of foliage, and then sort of bringing it further down onto the street level. I tend to like groups, so groups of 2 or 3 houses at a time, just so it just feels like everyday life, really. I have been asked on a few occasions to do customers' streets, and they've sent me a picture, a photograph of like a Google map of their street and all the different houses. Sometimes they work better if it's a townhouse sort of situation as opposed to a row of bungalows. They're quite challenging. To be honest, I generally say no to things like that, just because it doesn't really suit my sort of work. But one of the most lovely commissions I've done in the last sort of year or so was it was a heritage piece for a customer, and she wanted every single house she'd lived in, from the house her dad built back in, gosh, I don't know when that would have been, a long, long time ago, up to the house she's currently in. She was a fairly elderly-ish lady, so she'd lived in probably 7 or 8 different houses over her lifetime, and she wanted them all to sit, but sort of sit in a row, but in the background, something to remind her of where that house was. So a particular part of the town she wanted to incorporate in it. And she also wanted the respective car at the time going along the road to match the house. So it was a huge sort of project that took me a good few months. But at the end, it was really, really interesting to do, and she loved it. She really loved it, and she sent me photographs of all the houses, and then I used Google Maps to look at it now and see what's around the house. So I think I'm not sure if I'd do it again, but for that particular customer, and because it was something new and I had time to do that, it was a lovely piece. Yeah,
that sounds absolutely remarkable. What an amazing piece of work to have all your memories of where you've lived in the one place.
Yeah, I know. And it's I've also done another street scene with the different seasons as well. This customer wanted one starting in, I think I started it in spring, going along the season. So all the weather at the background, in the sky, the weather was very different over different parts of the house, in different parts of the street. So that was a lovely idea. And I had thought of doing that myself, but didn't really have a proper excuse to put so much time into something that may or may not have a job in the end. It may just be for my own creativity, but because this lady wanted it doing for herself, then obviously I thought, well, I could justify spending the time on doing that. So so that was lovely. Yeah, it was really nice.
Now, you mentioned there that one piece had taken you several months to create. Presumably you have multiple pieces of work all on the go at the same time.
Yes, often I do, and it's often at the most busiest time of the year as well. It always works out that way. So my busiest time of the year is basically from now till Christmas. But it's sort of also when commissions tend to come in as well. And I know the customers don't often appreciate when you're a maker and you're making towards towards the gift sector and all the rest of it. But some commissions I can put off and ask them if they wouldn't mind leaving it until spring. But often it's 2 or 3 different commissions on the go, pinned up to the workshop wall so I can keep looking at them, doing a little bit here and there. But then day to day, it's just getting through the online orders, really. So most people are happy to wait, though, really. They don't mind. But I think there's something quite special about putting an order in and then not actually seeing it, for 2 or 3 or even longer months down the road. It sort of makes it special, which it is, the commission piece is a special piece. So.
I'm sure they are. You can't rush something like that, can you?
No, you can't at all. It's too frustrating, and I find I can't sew if I'm overly tired. There's no point, because the next morning I'll just look at the work I did the previous night and think, no, that needs to be started all over again. So it's taken me 15 years to work that one out, but it's your limits basically. And when you're a one-man band, I think you have to be kind to yourself as well, otherwise you know, it's pointless really. So
Have you always been creative, Cathy?
I think I have really, yes. So from being really little and, you know, sitting on my nana's knee and going through the button box, you know, a lot of sewers and creative people will have lots of early memories about where it all began. I think it wasn't even really what I could do with all these buttons. It was more where they came from, what garment, you know, they were used on, and obviously, you know, Nana's button boxes. Gosh, some of those buttons were passed down the generations, you know, totally wasted on a 3-year-old. But it was more sort of fingering through them really and imagining what I could make with them. So yeah, I have actually always enjoyed the process of making. So from starting off with initial, oh, that's nice, I could maybe do that, or even an idea that you haven't seen on the telly or in a book or whatever. I've always liked the thought of how is that made, not even necessarily just from fabric, just the whole process of photography, engineering, how products are actually made. I've always been really fascinated with that process. So yes, I have really. It can be quite annoying sometimes because I always think, oh, I could have a go at that and never end up actually buying it. So I think now that I do know my limitations, and you know, I really love and appreciate other makers and really see how much thought and effort and love has gone into a piece. So yeah, I've always been a maker. I think I always will be actually. So.
And at what point did you go from presumably making things as a hobby to actually turning it into a business?
It started really about 15 years ago, in an attempt to avoid going back into the world of finance. I'd previously done a degree in engineering and product design, which had a big creative element to it, but towards the end of my degree, found it extremely boring. Product design isn't quite as creative as you perhaps initially thought it was. So left that side of my life behind for quite a number of years, and hadn't got a job in finance, and then obviously had kids. And it wasn't until I was trying to hatch a plan to avoid going back to work that I sort of thought about going back into something creative. And just took a good few years whilst the kids were babies to relearn how to use my sewing machine really, and learn what it was that made me happy in terms of textiles and sewing 2 pieces of fabric together. You know, it's and I think it really, having kids really gave me that bit of breathing space to just refocus on that. And thankfully my husband had just got a small promotion, so it took the financial sort of burden off me going back into work away. So that was really well timed. But I did take a lot of time working out who I was going to actually be sewing for, because obviously sewing for yourself is very different to sewing for somebody to encourage them to buy that product. So did take a lot of time just doing my market research, working out who was doing anything similar, what they were pricing it at. So yes, it really took quite a few years, I would say, but it did start locally. I started selling my work at sort of local craft shows, which started to pop up really because there was quite a few handmade magazines popping up on the shelves and TV shows, and off the back of that, makers fairs as well. They started appearing for similar-minded people really, and that's how initially I got my work shown at the sort of local markets. But really the big drive was when the internet landed, and it really pushed my sales from being just locally to obviously worldwide. So it was, I just started doing it at the right time, I think. So handmade was popping up in general. People were trying to buy something that wasn't on the high street. They were looking for something different. You know, people were sort of crying out for something a bit more unique. And it was obviously off the back of that the likes of Kirsty Allsop, other sort of TV presenters started to focus on the handmade element. So yeah, it was probably a little bit of being in the right place at the right time, really.
Mm. And you mentioned about the fact that you'd had the breathing space of starting a family, and the fact that you didn't need to rush straight back to work. I guess an awful lot of people at the moment in our current situation have had the same kind of breathing space, but for different reasons, and may well be looking to think, maybe I could do something on my own in the craft business world as well, rather than returning to an office environment or whatever. What advice would you have to somebody who perhaps is thinking about following in your footsteps?
I'm no expert, and it's something that I learn, and try and focus on a lot of time and energy on. But I think my main moment, the biggest moment when I realised that I had something that people were interested in, was when I acknowledged the fact that my market was a particular type of person. So rather than making for people who weren't similar to me, so maybe working on an idea that was a bit more quirky and aimed at a younger market, and not being happy actually making that product, focus on who you would like your market to be. So I suppose once I worked out that my market was mainly women, mainly aged 30 plus, mainly nature lovers and fellow creatives or sewers, I sort of knew who I was sewing for then, so I could really make sure that every time I sat in front of my design desk, I had those people in my mind, because really I'm one of those people. And I would think, well, would I be attracted by that piece? Would I like that? And if the answer is yes, then I knew there was something in it. If it was, it's okay, it's a bit bright, it's a bit gaudy, then generally not. I spent a lot of years fighting against that, really. I didn't want to fit into a particular area. But once I discovered, the Country Living magazine and the shows that they put on, I thought this is where I need to be. This is where I need to sew for the sorts of people who like quality handmade products with a feel of nature. That's where I need to be. So I think what I'm really trying to say is, know who your market is, and then really the rest isn't straightforward, but it's easier because you don't waste as much time making for somebody who isn't actually going to be interested in your work. And of course, making for somebody who are going to appreciate your work. They will also be happy to pay the price that you have worked out. It has to be priced at. That again is something that I struggle with. Not quite as much now, but at the beginning was really difficult to price my work. Knowing my worth was a biggie as well. But I think really that is the biggest piece of advice, is to know who you're making for. The other point is that, and I never really worked this out at the beginning, but as a maker, you will spend an awful lot of time thinking, drawing, making and remaking, and then working out your prices, remaking based on your new price. And that process can take months and months and months just for one particular product. So it can be a really time-consuming process, but if you're trying to make any sort of money from being a maker, it's really important that you do that. So I have two elements to the business. I have the staple products, which, for example, things that end up being a printed version, say the lanterns or the lampshades that I make, that are all prints of my original embroideries. They're a product that I make the proper profit on. the rest of my work, the original embroideries, I don't really tend to make an awful lot of profit on those because it takes so long to make those, pieces. But they're aimed at a particular type of customer, those who are generally sewers themselves or just want the original embroideries. So the two sort of offset each other really. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice, is to just know know your market.
Absolutely. And mentioning the pricing thing, I certainly know that an awful lot of makers do undervalue their worth when it comes to selling their work, because I guess they think that a lot of people who might be buying their products just don't understand how many hours and how much thought and effort goes into producing their work at the end of the day. It's just not a matter of simply buying raw materials and throwing it together. There's so much more involved, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. You're basically paying for, well, in my case, probably 20 years of mistakes, of just educating myself, really. I mean, my sort of design expertise goes back to sort of when I was 18, and I did a degree in product design, and what I'm doing now, some elements of it I have learned from my years as a student, and also it's just having this. It's always the time people pay for somebody else's time. That is the most expensive part of the whole process, and yes, people can try and do it themselves, and I have done that, on occasions, tried to have a go, but you soon realise that it isn't as easy as throwing things together. And I think some of the people that come on, well, all the people that come on the workshops that I hold soon realise that a whole day can be spent on one tiny 8x8 piece of fabric and it still not be finished. So it's having confidence in your abilities, really. And at first it took me, oh gosh, probably a good 8 to 10 years to realize my worth, but yeah, it sits a bit more comfortably with me these days, but I still don't take it for granted, and I still really struggle with pricing. Sometimes I cringe when I work out how much something should be charged, for a customer, but they pay it, and for that I'm very grateful.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned there about your workshops. Presumably, that's been hit by the current COVID situation.
Yeah, so it's really, really, really sad, but I know we're all in it. But this year, 2020, was going to be my busiest year to date of workshops. I've only been doing the workshops for about 5 years, but over the years I've built up enough confidence, and other workshop companies have got to know of that I do teach now. So this year I was away for a good half of the year, really, with planned workshops and that sort of thing, and obviously they all had to be postponed. So a lot of them are being pushed onto next year, but again we still don't really know how that's going to work out. And a lot of the ladies who attend the workshops tend to be of an older age group as well. I would say a good sort of 60% tend to be over 60 years. So I want to keep those ladies as safe as possible. So we're just going to see how it works out. But yeah, I've really missed not seeing them all, because it is a lovely, lovely way to spend a day, and I learn so much myself from the workshops, just by being around other fellow creatives. Really, it's but we'll keep our fingers crossed. It'll all come right in the end.
Yes, absolutely. Let's hope so. Now, your normal working environment, of course, is your beautiful studio in your garden, and I've seen photos of it. It is remarkable. I'm sure there's an awful lot of people that would give their right arm to have such a beautiful place to work.
Yeah, I am really lucky, but it was never. When we moved into this house, it didn't look like. The workshop didn't look like that. It was pretty grim. It wasn't insulated properly. It wasn't finished. It was made actually for somebody's mum to move into as and when she needed it. But they moved house before they sort of had time to properly finish it. So one year, probably a few years ago now, about 3 years ago, I saved up all the profit from the previous year's work, and I spent it all just doing my workshop up. Oh, it was just fantastic. A proper roof. I got rid of the mice. I got proper insulation. I got a big Velux window put in it. Oh, I really, really love it. And I know I'm so lucky to have it. Really lucky. So the photos you'll have seen of it, that isn't day to day. It's generally really, really tidy. Lots and lots of piles of fabric strewn everywhere. But I'm certainly not a mess, not a neat worker at all. And I think a lot of people who deal in fabric, especially, they'll have their own stashes of fabric, and live in a permanent state of disarray, really. But I think that's how we carry on being creative. You can't be creative in a tidy environment. Well, I don't believe anyway.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that.
That's my excuse anyway. Yeah, life's too short to tidy up anyway. So.
Now, what does the future hold for you and for dear Emma?
Oh my gosh, I've no idea, to be honest. I still really want to carry on what I'm doing in some format. I probably won't exhibit at shows as much as I used to do. Much as I absolutely love that side of the business, actually interacting and taking people's money and seeing how delighted they are with the work. It does mean I'm away from home an awful lot, and I would rather spend that time going away to teach, I think, rather than coming home totally wiped out for a week, because it really does take it out of you as well. And obviously it's just me doing it. I may have my mum and occasionally my aunties to help at certain times of the year. So, for example, Christmas time, I have them come and help. But it's really about to keep focusing on what I'm doing and just keep getting better and better, really. Probably reduce the amount of products down a little bit, make it a little bit more tighter, but I think just really keep focusing on what I'm doing. But yeah, the workshops are great. I absolutely love doing those, and I often get invited to Embroiderers Guilds to do talks and sort of small workshops with them, and that's great because I get to go all over the country, meeting people from the guild. So I think especially with the uncertainty of next year and subsequent years, I think I'm just going to keep it quite straightforward and just keep doing what I'm doing.
Well, I certainly, speaking from my own point of view, very much look forward to seeing what lovely works of art that you create in the months and years to come. And thank you so much, Cathy, for speaking to me for Making Stitches. It's been a real joy.
Oh no, thank you so much for asking me.
What a treat it was to speak to Cathy. I loved hearing about how her business has developed over the years and found her business tips really helpful. If you'd like to see Cathy's work, you can find her at Dear Emma Designs on social media. I'll also include a link to her website in the show notes for this episode. And as for the name of her business, I did ask her off mic about the name Dear Emma, when her name's actually Cathy. It's named after some very good friends of hers who are called Emma, just in case you were wondering. Thank you, Cathy, very much for speaking to me for Making Stitches and for being so generous with your time. And thank you to you too for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to leave a review or rate it on your favourite podcast app, that would be really helpful to help spread the word about Making Stitches. And I'd be very grateful indeed if you could do that for me, please. All being well, I'll be back again in 2 weeks' time with another chat with an inspiring maker. My name's Lindsay, and this podcast was recorded and edited by me. You can also find me on my blog, Postcard from Gibraltar. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep safe and enjoy your crafting.